Him is a sports-themed horror movie that follows Cameron Cade, played by Tyreek Withers. He's an up-and-coming football star who suffers a traumatic brain injury that threatens his career. While hope seems lost, he's invited to train with the highly esteemed football star Isaiah White, played by Marlon Wayans, who Cam idolized growing up. What starts out as an exciting opportunity for Cam ends up turning into a nightmare when he comes to realize that Isaiah and his sycophants are very unstable, leaving Cam trapped in a dangerous situation. So this movie merges sports culture with psychological horror, using that blend as an allegorical engine to explore the pitfalls of stardom. This movie digs into the price of fame, the things we sacrifice in pursuit of greatness. Cam is put to the test when he's literally forced to make decisions that test just how badly he wants to be the GOAT. This movie also digs into the other side of that with statements about fandom. This is very much a story about obsession. It's about how the world of sports fandom can veer into cult-like territory with fans who worship their team and the athletes as if they are divine. That is not to say that every sports fan is part of a cult. It's just a statement about the people who get consumed by those things and, figuratively speaking, froth at the mouth online about them. On the flip side, there's a large amount of obsession in the world of sports on the athletic side. This movie digs into how athletes themselves sometimes treat the game like it's life or death. Taking the sport that you've poured your life into seriously is one thing, but allowing it to send you over the edge to where your blood boils and you act like a complete tyrant to those around you is a completely different thing. This movie makes an A-B comparison through this treacherous situation where Cam needs to perform on the field on behalf of an actual life or death situation, suggesting that perhaps an ordinary game doesn't need to be taken that seriously. There's also a bit of commentary on things like doping and generational trauma that perhaps could have been explored a little bit more. It feels like those things were kind of missing actual statements. A lot of this stuff is depicted symbolically through various theological themes, references to Christianity and paganism. It plays into how celebrities and athletes are sometimes treated like gods or prophets, and how fans can sometimes act like sycophants. We see that in the interesting mix of surrealism. Cam has suffered a brain injury, so we're sometimes wondering if these figures he's seeing are actual fans who have been consumed by fandom, or if he's just seeing things because he sometimes does. There are times where this works well, and then there's times where it's just kind of dumb. Like the first time we see a dude who's just dressed up in full-on pagan god attire, it kind of just didn't really make sense at the time. And if we're being meticulous and reading between the lines, trying to make out what they represent in the actual context of those faiths, the symbolism just doesn't really line up. But I'm not a complete smartass. I get what the movie was going for, message received. The religious elements are just one of the ways this movie sports some pretty heavy visual flair. The lighting and production design is pretty glossy, aptly matching the flair of the sports broadcasting world. It's sometimes pretty striking, and then other times okay, and then other times it kind of just feels like it's in music video territory. The cinematography is also pretty impressive though. It uses lots of symmetry and slick uses of dollies and steadicams. And then there's the flashy spurts of CGI that add style to the movie, as well as a much needed photosensitivity warning. Like the frame will go negative and we'll see 3D models of their skeletons, making the depictions of sports injuries more immersive while also making it a little bit creepy. Which finally brings us to the horror. The movie can be pretty gruesome, especially in the last act, and there's a few jump scares, but not really satisfying ones. Some of them are the cheap kind that you're probably gonna roll your eyes at after. Sometimes the horror stuff can be a bit cheesy. I almost wanna compare it to The Substance, where it's a little bit on purpose to play into the movie's humor, but it doesn't fully get there here, and it's sometimes just straight up cringy. Some of the humor is a little bit cute. I audibly laughed at like one thing in the entire movie. Otherwise, a lot of the humor is just pretty generic. Some of it plays off Isaiah being unhinged, and at best it's mildly entertaining, but not really hilarious. But Marlon Wayans was certainly the standout of the movie. He's angry and unhinged, and it sometimes works really well. He mostly comes up short because he just doesn't have a sensible motive, which we'll talk about in a sec. But Tyreek Withers is all right. He initially seemed a little bit understated, as if it's a flat performance, but that actually makes sense for an athlete. When doing press, they are sometimes pretty mumbly and unenthusiastic in the way that they speak. So this seemed more like a creative decision than it was a shortcoming. He otherwise has a couple moments in the third act where he gets the opportunity to shine with his performance, entering territories of lunacy and emotions, so he had some range. Julia Fox plays Isaiah's wife, and she was one of the characters who broke up the monotony. She did solid work with a character who, on paper, you probably wouldn't think to stand out much. And then comedian Jim Jeffries plays a sports doctor, and he was an interesting inclusion, though it's a small role where he hardly ever takes up the frame by himself. He's thankfully pretty subtle for the most part. Knowing him as a comedian, if he had a more boisterous role, it probably would have been hard to take him seriously in that light, but he was thankfully palatable. So now digging into bigger criticisms, notice how in the synopsis I referred to this as a sports-themed movie and not a sports movie. That is because this is absolutely not a sports movie. There is literally no football being played, just football practice. Part of me doesn't really care because it's actually pretty hard to make sports films original nowadays, so it probably would have felt out of place if there was just a big game that everything was leading up to. But still, there's so much of this movie, especially with the allegory underneath it all, that is centered around sports culture, so it's just bizarre that we don't watch a single game of football. And the allegory was clearly the sole point of focus during writing because on the surface, there are things that don't really make any sense, kind of like the movie Opus. For example, Isaiah invites Cam over to his property so that he can train him and groom him into greatness, but at the same time, he also feels threatened by him and he fears that he's gonna take the spotlight from him. This was a pretty big oversight, like, his motives just don't really make any sense. That and some of the individual commentaries are pretty loose-ended and don't really amount to anything. That's all in addition to the fact that the premise is kind of just played out. We've seen a lot of movies in recent years that are about the price of fame, so it's just becoming less and less novel. The movie also really breezes through the beginning, through the power of montage, skimming over any tension leading up to Cam going to Isaiah's place. It just rushes into throwing him right in there, so his love for his mother and his girlfriend, that all just feels like lip service, so there's no real heart in this movie. And similarly, it breezes through the end. It's a pretty flashy ending that embraces all of the movie's themes, but it just doesn't really tie a bow on Cam's story, and it just kind of feels like there's a blank space at the end where one more scene should be. I also feel obligated to say this loud and clear since seemingly everybody I know thought that Jordan Peele was the director here. He is not, he is just the producer, so curb your expectations. So the movie definitely has bad things, like the things that are bad are pretty bad, like 2 or 3 out of 10 bad. But I won't deny that there's a lot of this movie that really held my attention with its symbolic elements and the visual flair, so I wouldn't call it an absolute train wreck by any means. All things considered, this movie was fine. It's flashy and cerebral, but pretty half-baked and sometimes kind of cringy. It's fine for a turn your brain off watch, so if you're interested in this movie, perhaps wait until it comes to one of your active streaming subscriptions and play it in the background while you're doing something else, like staring at your phone. But I would not pay for a ticket. This is not one that you want to take all your friends out to the theater for. Thanks for watching this review. If it brought you any value at all, please give it a like. It really does help the channel grow. I'll see you later this week with my review of A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey.